A small wandering prince once looked up at the sky and asked a very profound question. Is the world fully made out there while our minds sit passively inside the dark, taking notes in the shade? For a long time, cognitive science operated on a similar assumption. We imagined the brain as a tiny librarian or a mailroom clerk trapped in a dark skull, waiting for the eyes to take pictures and pass them inside to be filed away into neat, logical folders. But a modern counter-theory called predictive processing turns that entire model upside down. It suggests the brain isn't waiting for sensory mail at all. Instead, it acts more like a Wizard of Oz hiding behind a curtain, aggressively forecasting reality before it even arrives. This wizard operates from the top down. He generates a prediction of what should appear, say, a tiger in the brush. He only pays attention when the bottom-up sensory data from the eyes or ears sends back a mismatch, reporting an error like, not a tiger, just a deer. Under this paradigm, the brain's goal is simply to minimize surprise. It filters out the noise to keep its internal model intact. The self becomes a fortress designed to predict reality, rather than an open window experiencing it. That sounds efficient, but it introduces a critical vulnerability. What happens when the wizard's predictions go wrong, but he decides he would rather ignore the error than update his internal map? Imagine a sour little grump who hates being wrong. To keep his certainty high, he takes a bucket of mortar and actively blocks out any contradicting data, sealing up the entrance to his cave so the outside world can no longer perturb him. When a system filters out all surprise and mismatch, it stops learning. The prediction hardens into dogma, a belief that stops taking updates. The internal model stops taking patches from the outside and begins to edit out living reality to match its dead predictions. A completely closed, perfectly predicted system doesn't actually achieve safety. It creates a psychological tomb. The mind becomes trapped by its own uncorrected assumptions, completely isolated from the environment it relies on to survive. Shattering the illusion of the closed fortress requires looking away from the wizard entirely and down into a single droplet of water. This is autopoiesis, the biology of self-making. A living cell is not a static noun, it is an ongoing verb. It survives through a continuous process of remaking its own boundary, a self-making blur where the network creates the membrane, and the membrane creates the room for the network to exist. Biologists call this interaction structural coupling. The external world bumps, heats, and shakes the cell. The world doesn't write instructions on the cell like a blank page. Instead, the cell dynamically alters her own internal structure to survive the disturbance without losing her identity. Living systems maintain an operational closure to protect who they are, but they remain energetically open to the world around them. They survive not by predicting reality from a safe distance, but by physically dancing with it. Now let's scale that physical dance up to a theory of mind. Think of a beetle dodging a hawk's shadow. Does that beetle have a tiny librarian inside its head, forming the proposition, I must avoid the hawk? The cognitive framework of radical inactivism argues that it doesn't. Basic minds operate entirely without internal models, stored sentences, or mental representations. A creature can turn, seek, avoid, and flee without inwardly stating what each thing must be. Perception is not a picture taken by the eyes, it is action in flight. We don't construct a complete inner map and then calculate our walking route. We learn what a surface affords us by physically reaching, recoiling, and moving through it. The mind is not a conqueror making calculations in a dark room. The body is an active, engaged participant, and meaning emerges strictly along the lived track of our interactions. If the mind isn't a sealed fortress, what is it? It is a seam. Every distinction creates an inside, an outside, and a seam. Notice the jagged line separating your internal story from the world. It's where internal logic collides with external reality. Think of this boundary as a prism into the shadow. As this panel shows, the reality we exclude doesn't just disappear. If we deny it, it becomes a shadow that is pushed across the boundary, returning later as destructive friction, noise, and systemic cost. Catastrophic failures, whether an emotional breakdown or a massive software crash, invariably occur at these exact seams. The failure happens the moment we refuse to let external reality patch our internal beliefs. This toolkit graphic highlights how we survive the constant friction of the world. We must keep the seam slightly ajar, often by using a single word, yet. That word suspends our absolute verdicts and prevents our internal models from calcifying. Managing the seam means accepting that biological survival depends on a willingness to be corrected. Attempting to balance life like a spreadsheet or gate out every sensory error only forces the system toward a rigidity that precedes a break. Look at the ostrich in this diagram. The world's unscripted chaos, the ostrich, the whale, the storehouse of snow, isn't a problem to solve. It's a gratuitous exhibition we are lucky to walk through. As the text says, sanity is patchability. If sanity is measured by the ability to take updates from the world, then the only way to stay viable is to remain unfinished. Keeping the seams open isn't just a technical strategy. It is the act of leaving enough room for a world that will always be larger than your story.